What's up, everyone? The Retro Gamer here, bringing you another edition of the Retro Gamer's Den. Now, yes, again, another narration. As I said in my previous video, might start doing multiple ones depending on what I have to say. And this is something that's been lingering on my mind. I was going to talk about this last week, but again, I didn't get around to it. I got busy with a lot of things. So I'm going to talk about it right now. I had this weird idea about Nintendo, and I know I talk about Nintendo a lot on this channel. For some reason, I talk about Nintendo a lot. I don't mean to do it a lot. I just think that Nintendo excites me, and I think that Nintendo interests me more as an old school retro gamer, more so than Microsoft's dull, gray first-person shooters do. Which there's nothing wrong with first-person shooters. I'm starting to get into them a lot more, but that's another topic for another time. I'm not going to dwell into that. Point is, I realize I've been talking a lot about Nintendo lately. This will hopefully be the last time I talk about Nintendo, at least until E3's presentations. I can't really promise that, though. Anyways, what I wanted to talk about this week was this weird idea that I had that Nintendo will never fully drop dual screen support. And here's why, and it kind of goes back to the previous video that I did where I was talking about why Nintendo will never drop the Wii U gamepad. I started to think about Nintendo's next generation consoles and Nintendo's next generation portable, more specifically, and I got to thinking it's going to be very hard for Nintendo to drop it. Because think about it, one reason why they did the 3DS was because the DS was so popular and they wanted to go with this idea, but they couldn't just drop the dual screen because the DS had dual screen support. There was games that used it. Animal Crossing was one of them. I know that both the Zeldas that came out for the DS were fully touchscreen. So yeah, there was just a lot of games that used the dual screens. And while Nintendo isn't really focusing so much on the screens, there still are games that use them. After all, look at games like Super Mario 3D Land, where in order to use your backup item, you have to touch the screen. Resident Evil Revelations, you don't really need to use it because they have CirclePad Pro support, and they also have the ability for you to just simply, press Y, I think, to reload, and the D-pad to switch between weapons and stuff like that. But you could just simply touch the screen and reload the weapon, or switch weapons, or switch items, or just simply touching the screen. It makes it a lot faster of an interface. And I used to use the CirclePad Pro a lot because I have the small 3DS, and I'm more like going to upgrade to the 3DS XL because I just think that I just want something that fits better in my hands, my big man hands. And I just noticed that the CirclePad Pro isn't used a lot. So when I went back and I played like Moon Chronicles, because my CirclePad Pro died and I had to replace the battery in it, and I went back and I played Moon Chronicles with the touchscreen, it felt more fluent. It felt better. It reminded me why the DS games worked with touchscreen, why Moon was even created to begin with as a competition to Metroid Prime Hunters, because that is the standard. Metroid Prime Hunters looked really good on the DS, used touchscreen controls in a manner to where you had to use the touchscreen. So the whole point of this rant is that it's going to be difficult for them to go back to that. Because think about if the next generation portable that Nintendo releases doesn't have a touchscreen, doesn't have a second screen at all. How are they going to do certain games? I mean, yes, sure, certain games like Kid Icarus Uprising, you could easily just say, well, just overlap the screens. Have it to where the subtitles show up on the bottom of the top screen, and you just simply move Pit and, using the circle pad, and then use the touchscreen itself. Make it similar to how a Vita is. And yes, that's one option that you could do easily. But then what about games, like I said, with Resident Evil Revelations, which puts the map on the screen and puts the inventory on the bottom screen? it'd be difficult to overlap them. I'm sure you could. I'm sure you could set up some kind of a system to where when you press select, it brings that up. You can quickly swap between them, or even use the D-pad and the face buttons, like I just talked about. And I really do think that it would be helpful when Nintendo's next generation portable comes out. And again, that's a completely different rant about what I think they're going to do with the next generation portable. I'm not going to talk about it here. I'm just going to talk about why I don't think that they're going to do it. Because Nintendo is notorious for having backwards compatibility. They are notorious about it. They're about the only company that still does it. You know, there used to be a standard that Sony set for being backwards compatible. And then now Sony and, well, actually, Nintendo's always sort of set up backwards compatibility, now I think about it, because of their Game Boy series. But that's another story. Nintendo is notorious for being backwards compatible, is what I'm basically getting at. And with the DS, with the Game Boy Advance, they were backwards compatible to regular Game Boy games. With the DS, they were backwards compatible to Game Boy Advance games, but not original Game Boy games because they just weren't selling anymore. Then they eventually dropped that. Now with the 3DS, they're backwards compatible with everything. Like those DSi games, you can play DS games. You can go to the eShop and download Game Boy Advance and Game Boy games and things like that. They're practically fully backwards compatible. Which brings me to my point. The next generation portable was going to have dual screens in some ways, because it's going to be very hard to set up an interface that works with DS and DSi games and 3DS games. More so with DS and DSi games, because DSi and DS games use the touch screens a lot more. I know that there was one game, I think it was Lunar, which actually used both the screens. Like some bosses took up both screens. Sonic Rush takes up both screens, and Sonic switches between the two screens. And I think the whole point of that experience was to experience the whole level on one big screen, and Sonic whipped between the top and the bottom screens. I'm sure that there's ways that they could get around it. I'm just saying it makes the native language of those games more foreign, if you understand. And the same thing with the Wii U. Nintendo still has the Wii Remote because of the fact is they know that it's backwards compatible with the Wii, so they can't just simply not include the motion controllers, even if they wanted to stop supporting them, because there's people who still use them. You see? And because more likely the next iteration of Nintendo's home consoles, which I'll just call the Wii 3 for right now because I don't know what they're really going to call it. But the next generation home console that Nintendo releases is more like going to use that gamepad in some form or another. So they have to more, because just like they still support the Wii Remote and the Nunchuck for games like Pikmin and Mario and stuff like that they don't really even have to use them for, they choose to. And so for them to then go, well, we're not going to support that. We're not going to support that at all. There's going to be people that are just going to go, what if I want to play Pikmin 3 on your next generation home console? You don't support the Wii Remote anymore, and you don't support the gamepad anymore. I have no way of playing it. There's no point in being backwards compatible. And I guess that's just what my point is. Make sure that you leave your thoughts on the matter, of course, because if you can think of a way to make it work, I would love to hear it. But I can't think of a way to make it work without completely abandoning it. It's sort of like how the PS4 isn't backwards compatible to PS3 games at this time, and the Xbox One is not backwards compatible at this time to any 360 games, probably just because of the architecture that's involved. I'm sure that the architecture behind the PS3 was difficult to program for, and now that it's more open, it's probably limiting. I have no idea about how any of that stuff works. I'm not a technician in that sense. I don't know how, the RAM and the cores and all this stuff works. I don't know any of that. That's foreign language to me. I don't understand it at all. But what I'm getting at is that I think it's going to be really hard unless Nintendo completely decides to alienate the technology, to just go forget about the gyroscope technology, forget about the dual screen technology, forget about the touchscreen technology, forget about, you know, the Wii U gamepad, forget about the motion controls, forget about all that. This new system is completely built from the ground up with a regular controller, and it's not backwards compatible anyway, because then we have to support that Wii U gamepad. And then here's our next generation portable. It's one screen, has no touch features whatsoever, no touchpad, no touch screen, nothing. So we can't make it backwards compatible to 3DS games, simply because there's no way to do it. There's no touchpad, there's nothing to represent that. And I really do think that that's the reason why Nintendo has put themselves in this situation by creating a system that adds a second screen with the Wii U gamepad, and by creating a system that has two screens with the DS and the 3DS respectively, that they put themselves in a situation that they cannot go back from. They probably could, especially if they decide to do like Sony does, where they completely just ignored the PSP and they just said, if it's digital, you can play it on the Vita, otherwise we don't support it. Maybe they can come out of a way to where maybe the next generation portable registers digital 3DS games and maybe finds a way to work around it, or patches it to where it can be one screen, or you know, makes the touchscreen be a button input for games like Super Mario 3D Land. Something. I'm sure they could figure out a way to work around it. I just wonder how alienating that's going to be to the previous technology, though. Especially for some games, like I said, that have used the dual screens in the past. I don't know. I don't know at all. I know that there's some games that are completely touch-based that use both screens, like Nintendogs, that would probably feel weird to suddenly not have a touch screen anymore, or a dual screen. But I think that that's my rant for now. Make sure that you leave your thoughts on the subject. Do you think that Nintendo can go back to a one-screen system, whether it be a portable or a console? Because a part of me thinks that they can. They just might have to ignore the games or have this big workaround. Because it's easy to go from one screen like the Game Boy to two screens, like they did with the DS, because again the Game Boy game showed up on either the top screen or the bottom screen. But to go back to one screen, how do you have dual screen input now suddenly go back to being one screen? I think it might be a little complicated to do. It might be interesting to see them do. I don't know. But just because of Nintendo's notorious backwards compatibility nature, it might be difficult for them to then suddenly drop the Wii U support or the Wii U gamepad and say we're not going to use it anymore for our next generation system, without maybe alienating a few people or a few games, simply because of the fact is they used the gamepad and now you can't use it anymore. But without trying to go into too long of a rant, that's all I have to say on the subject. Make sure that you share your thoughts on the subject. I know I've said it before, but I think it's really important to start a decent discussion on this matter, as well as all the matters of my other videos. So make sure that you like, subscribe. As always, go back, check out my other videos, leave comments on them too. Let me know what you think. And if you have anything that you want me to talk about, make sure you send me a private message, and I'll give you a shout out if I happen to use it. Otherwise, guys, have yourself a good one, and I'll talk to you later.